Bringing the Nemesis to modern-day consoles is something we've been wanting for a long time. But the transition wasn't without a few hiccups along the way. Name's Dave with WatchMojo, and today we're counting down our picks for the top 10 best and worst changes made to the Resident Evil 3 Remake.
Commitment, honesty, integrity, these are the core values that create the foundation for Umbrella.
For this list, we'll be looking at the 5 most significant improvements to the game, as well as 5 changes that didn't land quite right. Since we're going into late game details here, be wary of spoilers ahead.
Look, just send in stars. They're gonna know what to do.
No, negative. RPD's overrun too.
Then figure it out!
Number 5, worst. Carlos's hospital defense.
I'm gonna try to lower the window shutters. The less entry points, the better. And how do we do that? I'll try hacking into the hospital security system. Keep them off me in the meantime.
While Carlos going into the hospital to search for a vaccine for Jill was in the original, it's what happened after he got the vaccine that was different. In the original, bombs were placed in the hospital foyer, completely obliterating the building. This time the hospital is left standing, but now Carlos has to defend the room Tyrell and Jill are barricaded in from an endless wave of zombies. This drastic shift in gameplay may have been intense in Resident Evil 4 when it was done there, but here this section feels tedious, as zombies are way too slow to pose any significant threat. It also goes on for way longer than it needs to. Number 5, best. The initial escape.
Listen, you gotta get out of there!
What are you talking about?
I don't have time to explain. You gotta get out of there right now!
Alright, let me grab my...
In the original, the only time we got to witness the carnage of the outbreak reach its peak was in the opening FMV. By the time we were given control of Jill, however, the carnage had mostly subsided, with zombies lingering everywhere.
I'd rather starve to death in here than be eaten by one of those undead monsters! Now leave me alone!
This time, we get to experience the peak of the outbreak, thanks to the surprise introduction by Nemesis himself. With panicked citizens in the streets, and helicopters blazing overhead promising rescue, this was certainly a great way to get the events of the game rolling.
Sir, are you alright?
Stay back! Don't come any closer!
Hey, come on. There's a helicopter waiting to take you to safety.
What safety? I'm not going out there!
Number 4, worst. Nemesis Beast Form Fights. Credit where it's due, the second form of the Nemesis is certainly more creative than just having a bunch of tentacles grow out of him like the original had. However, the problem isn't with his design, but how the game handles him from this point onwards. Part of what made the Nemesis so frightening in the original was that he could really come out when you least expect it, but once his transformation occurs, the fear of the unknown is lost, as the player is now forced into a boss fight arena with him or QTE segments, not helped by the fact that 2 of his fights have very similar patterns that can be easily read by the player.
So I'm high behind 7! Now!
Number 4, best. Tyrell Patrick.
We can't turn him over to the company.
That's not our call to make. That's Mihail's call. I'm gonna check the computer, see if I can trace the doc's location.
By far one of the remake's biggest strengths over the original is that it allowed for many of the characters in this world to be far more fleshed out. And Tyrell clearly got the better treatment this time around. In the original, depending on what room in the hospital Carlos visited first, Tyrell lasted for just one cutscene, in which he met an explosive demise. This time, however, he is introduced fairly early on as Carlos's partner, and contributes a significant amount to the story, including traveling to the RPD and watching over Jill after she's been administered with the vaccine.
Morning, sunshine.
You saved my life.
I sure as shit didn't. That was all Carlos. He carried you here and he treated you himself, crazy bastard.
Sadly, his fate is still sealed in the game, but at least we got to know him more this time. Number 3, worst. Action set piece heavy.
Rocket launcher? Really?
This is something that certainly wasn't very present in the original. The game has a frequent amount of action set pieces thrown in, that force the player to either run, fight, or perform QuickTime events. It even gets to the point where the Nemesis becomes less frightful than what he was the first time around. Unlike the original, if he aims the rocket launcher at you, you have to run down an alleyway, or you're forced to outrun him as he chases you. These sequences have less in common with Resident Evil 3, and seem more like something out of that disaster, Resident Evil 6. Capcom, you are relapsing. Number 3, best, the Substation.
It smells like... Oh, I don't even want to think about it.
While Jill needed to travel in the substation in both games to restore power to either a cable car or subway train respectively, it's what she finds at her destination that's different. In the original, activating the breakers opened a set of shutters where she could find a fuse for the cable car. Oh, and a handful of zombies that she could barbecue. This time, however, a swarm of insects, known as drain demos, have turned the substation into their nest, forcing Jill to go deep into the heart of it to restore power to 4 breakers. This easily made for one of the most chilling and terrifying sequences in the game, and one that has left us tense on subsequent playthroughs.
Enjoy.
Number 2, worst, the Railgun. In the original, the experimental Railgun was a large stationary cannon, in which Jill had to lure the Nemesis into its line of fire. This time around though, the final battle has the Railgun in handheld form, though I use the term handheld loosely. First off, look at the size of this thing! Considering the components it would be made of, you'd need at least 2 people to hold that thing steady. But that's not all. Look at what happens when Jill fires the weapon. You're telling me that this thing has a recoil powerful enough to shatter the concrete surrounding Jill? If that were the case, this thing would have shattered all the bones in her body. This absurdity is right up there with Chris punching a boulder. Capcom, you are relapsing! Number 2, best, Carlos at the RPD.
This is the police station. You sure? Looks like a cemetery to me.
This one was certainly quite the shake-up. In the original, the RPD was the first place Jill headed to, and it was also the first place she encountered the Nemesis. This time around though, it's Carlos that heads to the RPD, and this sequence now happens after the subway escape. There's a lot of interesting changes to this sequence too. For one, we find out how Marvin got bitten, why Zombie Brad wasn't in the Resident Evil 2 remake, and we also now encounter some lickers in the hallways. Perhaps one of the coolest throwbacks here is that the save room music that's played in the dark room is the theme of Resident Evil 2 save rooms, since this station was that game's main setting.
Well, if cameras killed those things, I'd be set.
Before we get to the best and worst change, I do have some honorable mentions. This sewer section that features these new enemies, the Gammas, weren't in the original game, and while brief, they were certainly a cool addition. On the other hand, while it's cool to see this interaction between Jill and Kendo, since they don't meet in the original, it's clear this was done for fan service, since it's a cutscene that doesn't really go anywhere.
Look, don't worry about me. I'm gonna make other arrangements, okay?
You better. You're the best gunsmith around.
Oh, no.
Don't do anything stupid.
Oh, that's your job, right?
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into your settings and switch on notifications. Number 1, worst, cut content.
Thanks, you saved us.
I couldn't let you die.
Is it you?
By far the worst change, and also the biggest criticism to come out of the Resident Evil 3 remake, is the amount of content that was cut from the original. Especially when compared to the Resident Evil 2 remake, which was able to preserve or reimagine most of its content. Despite the fact that we could see it from the river, the clock tower section is completely absent. as well as the Raccoon City Park, and the only boss fight that wasn't the Nemesis, the Gravedigger.
Oh my. What is that?
The game is also missing the branching life choice sections, as well as the Mercenaries mode, both of which were what made the original Resident Evil 3 highly replayable to begin with, thus leaving the remake really, really light on content. Capcom!
Out of the way!
Number 1, Best. Nikolai not with Umbrella.
Nikolai, what are you doing?
It's not after you.
Nikolai!
While he's no longer the UBCS commanding officer in the game, with that role going to Mikhail, Nikolai still has selfish and ulterior motives in this game, though it turns out there's someone else that was pulling his strings.
No, don't care. My client ordered me to reduce Umbrella to rub.
In the original, his goal was to wipe out all other mercenaries and supervisors, to make it seem like he was the only survivor from a suicide mission, thus in a stronger bargaining position to demand better pay.
Since I'll be the only one who knows what really happened, I'll have more bargaining power when it comes to discussing my bonus.
While he still turns against the UBCS in the remake for money, we find out that he's working for another party who wants to burn Umbrella to the ground. Considering this unnamed party is anti-Umbrella, it really could be anyone, friend or foe. Who do you think it is?
Who are you working for?
I'll tell you, if you get me out of here. I'll pay you whatever you want. You're a fool!
Do you agree with our picks? Check out this other recent clip from WatchMojo and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.